Welcome to Creativity Cooks. Today we are making stir fry. To make this recipe, you will need the following ingredients. 1 cup of meat. For this recipe, I'm using chicken breast. 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of pepper. Around 4 tablespoons of olive oil. Half a cup of broccoli florets. Half a cup of red bell peppers, half a cup of yellow bell peppers, half a cup of green peppers, which is optional, half a cup of mushrooms, also optional, half a cup of baby carrots, 1 teaspoon of minced garlic, and 1 teaspoon of minced ginger. To make the stir-fry sauce, you will need the following ingredients: 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, 2 tablespoons of cold water, 1/4 cup of chicken broth, 3 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1/4 cup of honey, and 1 tablespoon of olive oil or sesame oil. This recipe can be modified to make double or less. If you want to make less, simply half the ingredients, and if you want to make more, double the ingredients. Let's begin. In a medium bowl or a large measuring cup, add your cornstarch and water. Use a whisk or a mixing spoon, and you want to mix this cornstarch and water up together really well. You're going to see that the cornstarch is going to get a little bit hard onto the bowl or the cup or whatever you're using to mix this solution. So definitely use your mixing spoon and get into the corners of this cup or bowl, and definitely just use it to scrape up any of the cornstarch that might be stuck onto the bowl and mix it together with your water very well. In the same cup, we are going to add our chicken broth. We are going to add some soy sauce and honey, as well as some olive oil or sesame oil. It really does not matter if you use either one of the 2 oils. Sesame oil gives it a little bit of extra kick, but if you want to use olive oil, if that's all you have, this recipe tastes perfectly fine with olive oil as well. And once you've added these ingredients to this mixture for your soy sauce, you will need to use a mixing spoon and mix this together very well. The vegetables that you are using for your stir fry are strictly optional. In my recipe, I am using mushrooms, I'm using carrots, I'm using yellow and red bell peppers, and I'm also using broccoli florets. If you are using any type of vegetable, you definitely want to get a cutting board and get a knife, and these vegetables need to be cut up into small slices or tiny chunks. You want to be really careful when you are cutting things like these carrots. Notice how my fingers are away from the knife. They are kind of pressed inwards as I'm cutting. You definitely want to use the same technique because you do not want your fingers to get anywhere close to that knife, because we do not want to hurt ourselves while we are cooking. So go ahead and carefully cut up your carrots I'm cutting my carrots into some small chunks. I'm probably going to eat a couple as I'm cutting these because they're really tasty, which is perfectly fine. You just want to make sure you have enough left over for your stir fry. And just go ahead and cut all of these up that you're using. And once you are finished cutting them up, I'm adding all my vegetables just to one big vegetable bowl. And you can go ahead and do the same with your vegetables as well. Next, I am moving on to cutting up my broccoli florets. I am simply going to just go ahead and cut my florets into half. Again, as you are cutting, be very mindful of that knife. You want to keep your fingers away from the knife when you're cutting, and you also want to make sure that the item you're cutting is right on the cutting board and you're not cutting it with your hand. And once you've cut up your broccoli florets, again, I'm just adding all my vegetables to the same vegetable bowl, and I will continue going along cutting up the rest of my vegetables. Like right now, I am cutting up my bell peppers, my red and yellow bell peppers. I am going to slice them into some thin slices, and after I slice them into thin slices, I'm going to go ahead and cut them again into some tiny chunks. You want to cut these up so they're small because it takes less time for them to cook when they are cut into smaller pieces as opposed to just putting the entire thing into your pot. But again, as you are cutting, you want to be very mindful. Notice how my fingers are slightly curved in. They are away from the knife, and I'm cutting it with no fingers anywhere close to the blade of this knife because I want to cut them up, but I want to cut the vegetables. I do not want to cut my fingers, and neither do you. And once again, I'm just going to cut them into some small chunks, and once they are cut into chunks, I'm going to add them to my vegetable bowl. So all my vegetables that are going to go into my stir fry are nice and cut up and ready to go as I can move on with the rest of my recipe and making sure that my stir fry is very tasty. If you are using meat for this recipe, in my example, I am using fresh chicken breast. You can also use beef. You can also use a slightly cooked chicken breast, whatever meat that you are using. You just want to make sure, however, that along with your vegetables, your meat is also cut up into some small chunks. And again, when you're cutting meat, if you've noticed, I've changed my cutting board. You do not want to use the same cutting board that you are using for meat and vegetables at the same time. So I've changed my cutting board. I'm cutting up my chicken breast into some small chunks, and this is the meat that I'm going to be using for my stir fry recipe. Now, some people have asked, do you have to use meat? Absolutely not. If you want to make a vegetarian stir fry, you can just cut the vegetables up. You can add a lot more vegetables to this as well. If you do not want to use meat, you do not have to. For this example, though, I am using chicken breast, and I'm just cutting this up and getting it prepped so I can start cooking it. So once my meat and my vegetables are all cut up, I'm going to start preparing my pot. So I'm going to add some olive oil to a medium pot, and I'm going to place it on the stove on medium heat. Once this olive oil is on the stove and my stove is on, I will begin by adding my chicken breast to this pot, and I will begin the cooking process. Be very careful when adding your meat. Be very careful when you are adding your meat to this pot. As the oil begins to get hotter from the stove being on, you do not want the oil to splash up on your hands or on your face. So gently add the meat to this pan. And as you can see, as the oil begins to heat up, my chicken breasts also begin to sizzle. Use your mixing spoon and just gently begin to stir this pan. If you notice that the oil begins to sizzle way too much, you definitely want to to turn the stove down just a little bit so that the pot does not get too hot, the oil does not get too hot, and nobody gets hurt from cooking this amazing recipe. Again, use your mixing spoon, have it close by, and you want to just turn this meat over into the oil, and we are just going to keep on stirring it up. This chicken is going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to cook thoroughly, and we definitely want to make sure that all sides of this chicken or whichever meat that you're using gets thoroughly cooked. You will know when it's fully cooked because you will not see any pink left in this chicken, and you will not see any um, any of the redness in any of the type of meat that you're using. The color, as you can see from my chicken breast, is starting to turn a little bit white, so it's starting to cook. At this point, you can also add a little bit of salt and pepper or any other spices you wish to this chicken for extra flavor. By adding some spices at this point, it just kind of gets infused into your chicken or into your meat as you are cooking it. And I personally love to add it to the meat at this point as opposed to simply just relying on the stir fry sauce to add the flavor to the meat that I'm using for my recipe. So your meat is going to need to cook for about another 5 to 10 minutes or until it is thoroughly cooked. As it is cooking, just a reminder, use your mixing spoon and just keep stirring it occasionally, and watch out for any oil that might be splashing up from this pot. If it is getting too hot or if it's sizzling too much, then definitely turn your stove down a couple of notches so that it does not get too hot for you. My chicken is almost ready. It is starting to sizzle a little bit. It's starting to get a little charred. You do not have to cook it to this much extent. I personally like when my chicken is a little bit charred. But once it is finished, we are going to turn off the stove, remove the chicken. You can add it to a separate bowl, and we are going to use the same pot to start working on our vegetables. So once you've removed the pot and removed the chicken, we are going to add this pot back to the stove and turn the heat on to medium heat. We will need to add some more olive oil to this pot because we'll need something in it to help to fry our vegetables just a little bit. And once we've added the olive oils, you are going to go ahead and add all of your vegetables to this pot so they begin to cook as well. At this point, if you also want to add a little bit more salt and pepper to the vegetables, you are more than welcome to do so. It just helps to add a little bit of extra spices, a little bit of extra flavor. It is purely optional, it is up to you. I am going to add some to mine because I really like it. And again, occasionally as this is cooking, I am going to use my mixing spoon and I'm just going to continually stir my vegetables up. They're going to be cooking for about 5 to 10 minutes on their own, and I want to make sure that they're still a little bit crispy, but they are thoroughly cooked. And once my vegetables are just about ready, I am going to go back now and get the chicken that I've already cooked and add it back to this recipe. I'm going to add it to my pot and use my mixing spoon to just mix everything up together. You want the chicken to get some of the flavor from the vegetables and the vegetables to get some of the flavor from the chicken. So the stove is still on around medium heat, and we are just stirring up our chicken and our vegetables together. So the soy sauce mix that we made in step number 1, let's go back to it now. We've set it aside. Because it's been sitting for quite a while, we are going to use a mixing spoon or a whisk, and we're just going to stir this up just a little bit more so that if anything is sit and settled, it will just get remixed into it. And we are now going to add that soy sauce mix back into our pan. We are going to add it in, and then we're going to use our mixing spoon and just mix this up together really, really well. I had a little bit of extra soy sauce mix in my my measuring cup, sorry, that I was using, and I'm just going to pour the rest of it into this pot and continue mixing. As you can see, the water, not the water, the soy sauce mix is starting to get a little heated from the pot. I'm going to stir it up, and once that soy sauce begins to boil, we are going to let this cook for about another minute or so. We want this to boil. The cornstarch is going to help to make it a little bit thicker in your pot, but we do want it to boil really well to reach that boiling point, and we're going to leave it for about a minute once it starts to boil. And once that is done, we are going to turn this stove off, remove our stir fry from this heat, and we are going to enjoy our stir fry. Okay, great. It has definitely reached a boiling point. It has been boiling now for over a minute or so, and we are going to turn the stove off. We're going to remove the pot from the stove and allow it to cool for about 5 minutes or so. If you've made some rice or some noodles, you can definitely go ahead and start enjoying this recipe. You can serve it to your family, to your friends, enjoy it yourself. But however you do, we really hope that you like this one a lot. Thank you so, so much for cooking with us. We will see you guys next week.